We're going to be welcoming Valerie Olson. She's a professor at the University of California, Irvine, the Department of Anthropology, and she's going to share SAPA's ethnographic approach to uncovering the localized water needs of diverse stakeholders. And so, Valerie, if you're prepared, I think she's going to be loading up some slides. And so we'll have her. Hi, Valerie. Thanks for being with us.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Thank you. Okay, Valerie, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here to follow the speakers, the leaders today, Anacita Agustinez and Yana Garcia. I am so grateful for your work and leadership. I'm speaking to you today from the unceded lands of the Hachavan and Yuhaviatom and Tongva peoples near the San Diego Creek and the cached underground waters of the deep earth, which continue to be impacted by settler, colonial, and industrial activity in this land. So I'm here today to give you an overview of some of the activities and partnerships that were created during a project that spanned about 2.5 years. My role on it ended last fall. In the fall, when I and Marissa Perez-Reyes finished working on a report, which is available online and was put online at that time. And I'll give you some information about that and give you an update on the current status of the report, which is under revision. So the policy problem that we were faced with was how to improve water systems and infrastructures, but specifically by engaging so-called disadvantaged communities, a term and word that has been overturned and in which we provide an alternative to in the report that we wrote. The challenges were that there was not a strong community-centered evidence base for figuring out what kind of needs people had from communities that were traditionally marginalized and ignored when it came to water planning. And also the challenge that was there, a very distinctive challenge, was sustainable involvement with ongoing and ethical commitment from joint powers authorities and water agencies and other utilities to provide and continue to work with communities long after this project was complete. The scale is the watershed. The watershed is a space of inhabitants. It does not map onto the political geographic markers of settler colonial rule, including counties and cities. It is an interesting space. It's a space informed by gravity, by the flow and fall of water. Under those conditions, the power of the watershed, the political dimensions of the watershed, are often created by powers, in this case, settler colonial powers, having the ability to move and determine the points at which water flows and what happens to water when it gets to those points. The method that we used to engage this work with SAPA, we were brought in to develop an instrument and then to start a process that allowed for community-based engagement. The partners involved in this are, which I'll show in a minute, basically we're working together to try to do a community-based process. It was a relational process. Ethnography is a process based on showing up and becoming a part of or joining with people in communities through interviewing, participant observation, which means we join in and are taught by communities that we engage with how to live and how to work with them. Ethnography is traditionally open-ended qualitative data to capture content and experience. It is not necessarily based in survey research, although surveys can be used, but we tried to open the door to a more interactive listening and embodied presence-based rather than extractive and distanced survey-based engagement. So the funder for this was Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority through the Prop 1 DCI program. And what was originally called for was a needs assessment. And that's a particular concept that all of you are probably quite familiar with. And the goal of it, the formal official goal of it, was to provide technical assistance, selection, and funding for projects, but also to try to create pathways and conduits for participatory planning. The project partners were universities, CSU San Bernardino Fullerton and UC Irvine. We have now the Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous Peoples involved. The local government commission was involved and continues to be, Cal Rural Water Association, and the Water Education Foundation. And these groups are collaborating still to continue to add information to the report and to continue to develop it, as I'll indicate in just a little bit. So our report went live last fall, right around November, I believe. And this is the link, and you might all be familiar with it. And what we tried to do in this report, and I'd like you to direct you to the report, if you haven't already seen it, please take a look, was to do a strengths and needs assessment. So instead of to just do a needs assessment, which marks people's voices and contributions with the idea of need, rather than to acknowledge strengths and the work of people that are already doing activities to either resist or to deal with ongoing hydraulic injustice. And we also had, the project also included a GIS tool that's under development to create accurate mapping of so-called disadvantage in the watershed area. We did a civic ethnography, meaning that we tried to collaborate with electeds, water providers, tribal groups, local community groups, to try to work together to produce the data and information in this report. We had some novel aims. So we were setting out to reverse the expert information flow. So rather than simply going in a traditional sense into a community and saying, this is what you need, the idea was to simply listen and to listen to water stories. It was extremely open-ended. We asked two very open-ended questions about people's water experiences and water stories to elicit the broadest and most autonomous capability and narrative of people involved in the project. We tried to do engaged and responsive research. The Newkirk Center for Science and Society have two engagement scholars who worked hard to expand the participatory collaboration networks. We had a series of those established by CSU. The Newkirk Center added to those participatory collaboration networks in the summer before the report was finished. So the aim there was to create and strengthen relationships. So when it comes to ethnography, ethnography has some advantages and disadvantages. The advantage with ethnography is that there's whole data forms, there's actual stories, there's information, people speaking in whole sentences, being able to tell their stories their own ways. There is a potential for sustained engagement. Usually ethnographers are involved at least for a year with communities they work with, and really and realistically for the rest of their lives. Disadvantage is that the sampling is not so clean cut, it's intensive, there's a lot of infinite variables, and you have to have trained analysts involved. Many organizations use surveys instead of our ethnographic approach to complete the Prop 1 requirements. Obviously, the advantages are that surveys are much more simple and easier and cost-effective to produce, but they also produce, their authority is based on statistical power, on aggregating, in my opinion, as an ethnographer, losing valuable and important information by aggregating and telling people what options they have to respond. So there's an administrative bias as well. So our ethnography was conducted in places that people felt comfortable, in places where their organizations were graciously hosting us to come and be involved and to speak with people. The ethnography report that was finally produced had an aim to be ethnographically informed. Those two open-ended questions were used for not only communities, but also elected officials, and for water agencies, large and small. We did this engaged listening. We had academic engaged partnerships. And what we were collecting was a lot of narrative that then had to be transcribed and analyzed for themes and important terms and concepts that rose to the fore that would allow us to do sort of the showcase piece of this project, which is to really see the connections and disconnections between these different groups, these different social groups, elected officials, community groups, tribal groups, and also the water agencies, the mutual water companies and water agencies. And what we wanted to do was to see connections and disconnections between these groups and their perceptions of the process. So I want to give you an example of what such disconnections and connections revealed to us. We looked at the idea, the concept of water quality, and we saw over and over from the perspective of communities, there was a mistrust, not a trust of the tap, but a mistrust. And we have a series of tables in our document in which whole phrases and sentences and even paragraphs of people's voices are represented in order to preserve the integrity of their experience and of their critique, but also their sense of what needs to be done about this problem. And we found connections. We found that across the board among these groups, there were concerns with how people were becoming informed or uninformed and how they were experiencing the variable of quality. And we found disconnections as well. Agencies, elected, and otherwise advantaged persons versus lay community tap-based perspectives. So the perspective of people with the authority and power to produce the water and push it through taps, and people in the areas of receiving water through their taps. And it revealed hidden factors of power and exclusion, which we detail in the report, where trust is a situated variable. By situated, it means where you sit, where your tap is, what tap you're using, housing status. We found such important information from people who are renting and have no power to control the quality of their house infrastructure, whereas water agencies can guarantee the quality of water coming from the agency. The house itself becomes a problem. And also, we were looking at tap-based sensory evidence. When people say that their water smells bad, tastes bad, and they don't trust it, to really set that up against the official reports of water quality, so that we're trying to help water agencies and the powers involved in producing water for consumers, that quality is a situated variable as well. If someone is experiencing discolored water, experiencing sensory mistrust, or also a fear of contamination, that is completely legitimate and needs to be followed through. So we have a lot of possibilities here coming up. We've got the possibilities that ethnography presents to us, which I've listed here, of soliciting local knowledge and needs. We had in this some time constraints, some relationship building constraints. We had a small amount of time to be inclusive. We feel that the report needs to be more attentive to race and class variables. It is under revision right now. It is a living document. That's the advantage of a government document like this, and I look forward to its next forms. Thank you so much for the ability to be here today. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Valerie, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the reports. And I've had, the pleasure of some early sneak peeks of that. And I think what you mentioned about that it is a living document, it's under revision, it means that, you're thinking and responding to community concerns. And so I really applaud SAPA for taking that pause in order to make sure that the community's voices are there and elevated. So thank you. And thank you for that incredible work.